Good evening and welcome to Catholic Peekskill. I'm Father John Higgins, your host for this public access television show. So glad you could join us. In this program, we always try to cover things that touch on our Catholic faith, as well as our beloved city of Peekskill. And we have the example of Pope Francis is using all kinds of modern means of the media, including Twitter and Facebook, and even now he's done a number of recordings right into people's personal cell phones and has changed the church this way. So we're very excited tonight to welcome a friend of mine. Father Richard Veras is a priest who was ordained with me in St. Patrick's Cathedral on May 11th, 1996. He was originally from the Bronx, although later on his family moved to Long Island. He attended Hofstra University, and then with some experience with the lay movement, communion liberation, discovered his priesthood. He served as a priest in the Bronx, in Staten Island. He's taught in Catholic high school at Stepanak, and now he begins a new assignment at Our Lady of Lourdes High School in Poughkeepsie. Father Veras, welcome to our show. So glad you could be with us.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Tell us a little bit about your childhood, just to give us a background of where your vocation came from. You grew up in the Bronx, right?
I grew up in the Bronx. We went to St. Helena's Parish, St. Helena's School. My both parents went to St. Helena's School. And so, my family was a practicing family. And from the Bronx, when I was 9, we moved out to Long Island. And at that point, we went to public school because my parents couldn't afford the Catholic school after buying the house. But there was a great foundation laid at St. Helena's. And so my family always took the faith extremely seriously. And so growing up, I always had a sense that Christ was important, was an important factor in life.
Now, I know your pathway to the priesthood wasn't like it was for a lot of young men who they knew it when they were kids, they were on track the whole way through. You worked for some years before you entered the seminary. Tell us a little bit about your discernment to the priesthood. What factors were involved in that?
I had gone to Hofstra University, and when I was at Hofstra, I'd gotten involved in the pro-life club. And it's very interesting because the pro-life club, I thought this is going to be occasional friends. We're against abortion, we did some pro-life work, we did some charitable work, we picketed a local clinic, and I thought, well, these are people I'll know for a couple of years in high school. I was also involved in college. I was involved with the college radio station as well, and a theater group as well. And I thought, well, those are the people who will be friends for the rest of my life. And these pro-lifers were just sort of in this political activity club together. But it's so interesting because the other groups fell by the wayside. I'm still good friends with the people in that pro-life club. And more than just pro-life, it became really a place where we shared our faith and encouraged one another in our faith. And at Hofstra, one of my good friends, the pro-life club, asked me a couple of times, have you ever thought of the priesthood? And I told her no. No, that seems very sad to me. I don't think I would like that. And I didn't think much about it. This very friend, after graduating, did work with Mother Teresa's order in the South Bronx, the Missionaries of Charity. And so at that point, she called me up and said, I think you would love it here. I think you would love these people. And so graduating college, I got a job writing advertisements for a company on Madison Avenue. And I enjoyed writing, but I did in those years, I really felt a longing to give my life for something more, and using my writing skills, I worked for a toy company to sell toys, and I thought, okay, this is fine.
For some people, that would be a dream come true.
Yes, and so it was interesting. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed writing. I wrote for, I wrote ads for children's magazines. I wrote ads for parents' magazines. I wrote ads for marketers, and so in some sense, I enjoyed it very much. But I felt like there was something more. And in fact, I was on Madison Avenue, and I would frequently, on my lunch hour, go to St. Patrick's Cathedral and pray a rosary in the Lady Chapel. And so frequently when we have events at the cathedral, the Chrism Mass and ordinations, the Lady Chapel means a lot to me because I used to go there and pray sometimes on my lunch hour. And so during those years of working in Manhattan, I did go to the Missionaries of Charity to help out in their soup kitchen, and then one summer, I took a leave of absence from my job writing advertisements and just worked in their summer camp and worked in the men's shelter. And I was very moved. I was very, very moved for the community, that I saw among the sisters, the community that I saw among, at that time in New York, they had a community of priests with the Missionaries of Charity. I think they're in Tijuana now. I don't know if there are any in New York at this point. And so at that point, I started thinking about the Missionaries of Charity priests. These young men who seemed very excited about life, and for them it seemed faith was this great adventure. And so I thought, okay, let me do they called it a come and see. You would live there for 2 weeks. And so I lived with them for 2 weeks. I was very taken by the life. And then they said, why don't you come back in a year, spend the year serving the poor, working in our soup kitchens. And so I spent that year. I moved from Long Island back into Manhattan to do that work. In the meantime, I met this lay movement, Communion and Liberation, which was a lay movement begun by a priest in Italy whose emphasis was finding Christ in reality, in day-to-day life. And so now I had these two things going. I've got the Missionaries of Charity, and I have this lay movement. But I thought, I'm going to give my life completely to Christ. And for me, that meant the Missionaries of Charity. And so I spent a year. I worked in their soup kitchen in Harlem. I moved into Good Shepherd Parish in northern Manhattan. And so I worked. Good Shepherd had an overnight shelter. I helped out there. And at the end of that year, I went back to see the vocation director for the Missionaries of Charity. And I'm all ready to enter. This is going to be great. And he looked at me and he said, I've watched you serving the poor. And he said, and it seems to me that you don't love it. And, I didn't love it. It was a big sacrifice. And I thought, okay, but I'm willing to make this big sacrifice if it means I can have this community life and this, if this is going to bring me close to Christ. And he explained to me, he said, no. He said, I love serving the poor. It energizes me. It generates me. He said, the sisters, the seminarians, the brothers here, we love this. It's the way that we know that Christ is attracting us to this. And he said, so since I don't see that in you, I don't think you belong here. Which, and I felt terrible. You want to offer yourself. And so I left there very disappointed, but I've never forgotten that meeting. I've never seen that priest again since that meeting, but I've never forgotten that meeting, because for me it was revolutionary. It was one way that it was as if Christ took flesh, because for him, discerning the vocation to the Missionaries of Charity was something very concrete and very human. And so as I left, I thought, okay, I didn't love serving the poor. And he knew about communion and liberation. And he said, I don't know what your vocation is. He said, spend time with them. It's a Catholic group. It's approved by the Vatican. It's recognized as a charism of the Holy Spirit. He said, spend time with them and see what happens. What also was not lost on me in that meeting was he wasn't interested in numbers. He could have had another one like that. If he wasn't interested in numbers. He was interested in my vocation and my happiness. Also had, in a certain sense, the courage to say to me, I don't know what your vocation is, but just go into life. Go into life. Stay in touch with the church. Okay, where did you meet? You met us. You met Communion and Liberation. I don't think you belong with us. Take that seriously. And so I took that very seriously. And at that point, we were a bunch of young 20-somethings in Manhattan, who found this friendship, and we would do vacations together, and we would go to Greenwich Village and play pool together. We would do charitable work together in the South Bronx with a Dominican sister named Sister Mary Jane at the time, and we would meet once a week and we call it School of Community, where we talk about our life in the past week, and have I seen Christ happening in some way? And so I went back, I moved into an apartment with two other young men. And at a certain point, I thought, well, I tried the priesthood thing, and they said no. So now I'm open. I'm open. And I remember I lived with two other men. One of them was trying to break into the theater world, the film world. He's been working for New Line Cinema for a number of years. Okay. But at that point, he had tried out for some plays, and he came home one night, and he was all excited because he got a part in an off-Broadway play. And I remember I was trying to act happy for him, but I was so jealous, it was hard to even act happy. And I went to my room and I thought, what's wrong? How could I be jealous of my friend? What's wrong? I thought, I don't want to be in an off-Broadway play. And through part of the education that I received through Communion and Liberation, Monsignor Luigi Giussani, through whom the movement was born, always emphasized, look to the reasons of things, go to the bottom of things. And so I thought, I'm jealous of him. I can't just stop on, I shouldn't do that, and let me confess and it'll be over. Why? Why am I jealous? I don't want to be in an off-Broadway play. What am I jealous of? And I thought, I'm jealous of his enthusiasm. He's got this life as an adventure. And I thought, when did I see that? I saw that in the Missionaries of Charity Fathers. And this is what I wanted. And when did I have that in my life? I had it during that year. I was thinking of going to the Missionaries of Charity. And yet, the vocation director was completely clear, and I completely understood I don't belong there. So I thought, so where's that adventure coming from? And I realized, okay, the Missionaries of Charity, that was the Missionaries of Charity Fathers. It was their priestly community. And so I thought, maybe it was the priesthood. Maybe it was the priesthood that gave me this leap in my heart. And so at that point, I went to see my spiritual director, who I had met through the Missionaries of Charity, Father Richard Nielsen, who's a wonderful priest, retired on Cape Cod now. And I would go to see him maybe once a month. And at a certain point, he would ask me about the priesthood pretty regularly. And at a certain point, I remember telling him, if you keep asking me about the priesthood, I'm not going to come to see you anymore. And so he agreed. He stopped asking me. So now, after this episode with my friend, I went to see him, and I asked him I said, I think I want to think about the priesthood again. And the first thing he said was, great. So have you thought of any orders, any religious communities? Because I think I had told him once, if I was a priest, I'd want to be part of a community. I don't know if I could be a diocesan priest. And so he said, have you thought of any communities? And I said, you know what? I didn't bump into a religious community. I bumped into a lay movement. And this is answered, in a certain sense, my need to live my faith with other people. And I said, I bumped into a lay movement, so I think I want to look at the diocesan seminary. I want to be faithful to the path where my life has brought me, and and much to my surprise, the diocesan seminary, the diocesan priesthood fulfills my sense of adventure. It's been a beautiful, and completely unexpected vocation.
So to get us from where you were to there, it means obviously you discerned your way into the diocesan priesthood through the Archdiocese of New York, ordained in 1996. Tell us about, I guess you're beginning now your fifth assignment.
My fifth assignment.
You've worked in parishes and you worked in high school. Tell us a little bit about your priestly life and where the adventure is there.
For sure, the adventure very much was in parish life. My first assignment was Our Lady of Mount Carmel. We had masses in Italian and Spanish and English. I'm not fluent in Italian or Spanish, and I did masses in Italian and Spanish, so that was an adventure. And also an adventure because the encouragement of the parishioners was wonderful. In fact, I remember preaching an Italian homily once, and the words, I noticed the words were flowing out of my mouth, and as I was preaching, I thought, I think I'm even using the tenses correctly. And at the end of it, there was a professor at Fordham, Mount Carmel is very close to Fordham University, an Italian professor who was in the parish. She would always critique my homilies afterwards. And at the end of that homily, I thought, this is a breakthrough, this is a linguistic breakthrough. And after Mass, she met me and she said, that was the Holy Spirit, because your Italian is not that good. So there was a lot of beautiful things in parish life. And at Mount Carmel and then at St. Joseph, St. Thomas on Staten Island, I was very involved with the youth group in the parish. And I was at St. Joseph, St. Thomas for 7 years. Toward the end of that time, I had I had asked about offering myself for high school work, because one thing I noticed was that, in many parishes, it's so hard to get the youth group going, or you just have a few kids. And and I noticed that for so many students, the center of their life is their high school. It's not the parish. And I thought, okay, I want to bring Christ to where the center of their life is. And so I asked to go into high school work. And Cardinal Egan was very generous and very supportive. And so I taught at Stepanak for 4 years, an all-boys high school in White Plains. And then I was needed back in the parish, and I thought that was going to be a harder transition than it was. Once you've been in a parish, when you go back, you just, you hit the ground running.
Yes.
And St. Rita's was a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful parish. And then just this past January, I was asked to give my availability to return to high school work. And it was very interesting because when Pope Francis said, go to the outskirts, go to the outskirts, when I read that, I thought, well, how can I do that? How can I do that? I'm pastor of a parish. I can't leave the parish and go to the outskirts. Who'll take care of the parish? And but it haunted me. What does it mean for me to go to the outskirts? And when I got the phone call, which completely surprised me, part of my discernment there is I thought, well, I've been so haunted by go to the outskirts, and never did I think, after being a pastor for 6 years, that I would, go back to high school work. I thought, well, no, that was high school. Now I'm on pastor path, and so a lot of when I was discerning, a lot of it had to do with Pope Francis going to the outskirts, because for me the beautiful thing about high school work is you really can have a relationship with the students. You see them every day, and every year there's 125 more, that you get to meet. And so there was for every change of assignment, there's been a sense of adventure. When I went to St. Rita's, what's this going to mean? What's this going to be? And now it's the same thing. I haven't taught high school in 6 years. So what is it going to be like? I taught all boys. This is going to be co-ed. So this will be a new experience as well.
Some of our viewers from Peekskill may be graduates of Stepanak High School. I know some kids from Assumption School did go to Stepanak High School. You may remember them. And we also have a lot of readers of Magnificat, where some of our parishioners would be familiar with your writings. One particular adventuresome story comes from your teaching at the high school. Maybe you could share with the viewers the story of the preference test that you administered to the kids.
In fact, when I used to teach at Stepanak, sometimes the kids would accidentally find out that I was writing for Magnificat. Somebody in their parish, and they'd come in, "Father, you write for a magazine, you didn't tell us." And I would laugh and I'd say, yeah, some people out there like me. People out there So the preference test, we were in class, I was teaching juniors. I normally taught freshmen and sophomore, Old Testament and New Testament. This year, I was teaching a junior class, and it was a very active junior class, and they challenged me, and I challenged them. So I was teaching one day, and I don't even remember the topic, but one of the students was offended because I seemed so certain about God, about God's existence and the reality of Christ, and he found that offensive. And I remember at the end of that school day, I thought and I prayed and I thought, I'm in a Catholic high school wearing a collar. Even there, it's politically incorrect to be certain about Christ. And so I prayed, and I remember praying to Jesus and saying, okay, Lord, help me here, because now I have to learn how to proclaim you without mentioning truth, because the truth is now too offensive, to speak of the truth too clearly. And so I thought, what do I do? How do I get around this obstacle? What do I do? And so that night I devised the preference test. And what I wanted the students to look at is look at the desire of your heart and see how the Christian proposal corresponds so completely to the desire of the human heart, and the atheist proposal crushes it. And so, one of the questions was, everything had a choice A and choice B. Choice A, when someone you love dies, that's it. They're dead, you'll never see them again. Choice B, when someone you love dies, they live on somehow, and you can see them again because you will live on somehow. Which do you prefer? Not which do you think is true, not which do you prefer, which do you want, and give reasons for your choice. And many other questions like that. There is a God who loves you. You live in a different universe. No one particularly cares about you. Which would you prefer? And I gave it to them. The last question was this test easy or hard? And some boys wrote, it was very easy because the answers are so obvious. Other boys wrote, it was hard because I'm not used to looking at what I prefer, what I want. And to this one student, in a certain sense, ideologically, he claimed himself an atheist, and therefore I was being not understanding or not open to say I'm certain of God. And so he wasn't looking at his desires. So we sat in a circle when we went over the test the day after they took it, and this one boy, the one who had originally objected to my certainty, he said he chose the choice where if somebody I love dies, they stay dead. And I said to him, okay, let's go back to that. I don't understand the grammar of that sentence. I love you, but I never want to see you again. I love you, but I want you to stay dead. And I really did press on it because I wanted him to see, and everybody's at the edge of their seats as me and this boy are going back and forth, and finally he sort of explodes and he says, Father, I don't want to want something that's not going to happen.
Huh.
And as soon as he said that, what was incredible was all the other boys sat back in their seats. Because once he said that, in a certain sense, I don't want to think that he lost the argument. They realized, okay, he admitted it. I don't want to want something that won't happen. So what was the implied admission? I do want it, but I don't want to admit that to myself. Because I don't want to admit that the Christian proposal that God exists and He's present is completely enlivens the human heart, completely makes life an adventure. And the atheist proposal just takes joy away. Because when this boy would argue, there was not joy, there was anger. And the most fascinating thing to me was he still kept his atheist claim, but that was junior year. Senior year, he would frequently come by my classroom to talk about where he was going to go to college, to talk about his family, to talk about so many things. And that was, for me, one of the beautiful things about teaching, because he never came and said, well, I'm a Christian now, or I'm not atheist, but my hope is that in really pushing him to look at his experience, not just accepting his ideological complaint, that somehow he understood I cared about him. And somehow he understood that perhaps that, it's not that I took my faith seriously, I take life seriously. And so it was such a joy to have him coming by the classroom that following year.
Wow. So are you anxious to get back to the classroom again?
I'm anxious. No, I'm looking forward to it. It should be extremely interesting because it is to be in front of kids of high school age whose life is really opening up in front of them, to be at that moment in life and to proclaim Christ, to introduce them to the reality of Christ is a big adventure and for me a great privilege.
Now, Father Richard, just before we came on air, you were explaining to me that you were going to have 4 classes of freshmen and 1 sophomore class. Wouldn't you rather be in administration or being in the role of like a principal or administrator? You're going to have a full teaching load.
Right, but for me the beauty of that is being able to, to encounter the kids one by one. I remember when I was at Stepanak, somebody once said, another priest said to me, once they send you to high school, they forget about you. You'll be there the rest of your life. And I remember at that point being horrified. All that discernment, the whole thing, seminary was so I can be in room 111 at Stepanak High School for the rest of my life. But then at a certain point, I was at great peace because I thought, yes, but at room 111, 125 new kids come every year. And so, so for me, Pope Francis, go to the outskirts. For me, it's a huge privilege to be able to spend my time. I'm spending this time really preparing the classes, getting ready, to spend my time, that my biggest problem is how can I communicate the faith to this age group in this culture? I mean, the preference test came because of that. I didn't want to let that go. How can I communicate the faith to a boy who says he's an atheist, who is offended if I act certain about Christ? Okay, how can I get through to him? And so for me, that my biggest problem now, my biggest challenge is how do I communicate the faith to students in this age group in our extremely secular and sometimes hostile culture? And so I'm very happy for that challenge, and certainly that challenge is certainly as challenging as administration.
Sure enough, yeah. It's right on the outskirts at the periphery where those kids are today. So will you live at the high school itself?
I'm going to be living at a nearby parish. Tepenac had a priest residence. Our Lady of Lourdes does not, so I'll be at St. Joachim, St. John the Evangelist in Beacon, and I'll be helping at that parish on Sundays, which is also very beautiful for me because I will still have a parish experience as well as the school.
So you feel like you've come to adventure in your work as a priest?
Yes, yes.
Are you still in touch with the Communion Liberation movement?
Absolutely. I'm the chaplain for the Archdiocese of New York for Communion and Liberation.
Okay.
And that continues to be a huge, huge help in my life. I continue with my lay friends to help discern how do we see Christ in our life. And I have a school community also with a few priests. And so that charism, that method, was not just for a certain moment in my life. For me, it's a charism I belong to, as much as a Franciscan belongs to the Franciscans. It's a lay charism, and so it's been a great, great grace in my priesthood.
Father Veras, thank you so much for being with us. Thanks for coming to Catholic
you're
Peekskill.
welcome.
Really enjoyed interviewing you. And to our friends at Catholic Peekskill watching us, thank you so much for being with us. Father Rich, could you give us a final blessing?
Sure, sure. May the blessing of Almighty God, the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit descend upon you and remain with you forever. Amen.
God bless you, Rich. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
This is Catholic Peekskill. Good night.